Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 545. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, you ready to do this, Lee?
It's rock and roll.
All right. Here. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Lee Lyttle. Lee, welcome.
Welcome, Guy. Thank you.
All right, man. Thanks so much for joining me today. So Lee's a mental health worker. He's also an author. Statistics show that there are more than 45 million survivors of childhood sexual abuse in North America, and that 1 in 5 boys on this continent are sexually abused before age 18. The experience can unleash a bitter struggle for connection, and it can leave survivors grappling with the debilitating fallout that ranges from alcoholism and drug addiction to mental illness and a general failure to thrive. My guest today, Lee, brings hope for healing to millions of broken families through his lyrical memoir, Wounded Healer. This book unveils a profound yet raw story of Lee's journey through childhood sexual trauma and the debilitating experiences as an alcoholic that eventually followed. He tracks the shattering feelings of isolation and bitterness that haunted his days, along with his conscious mind's demanding desire to numb his memories of the hideous day when his innocence was stolen from him. All right. Lee, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm really grateful and honored to be here on the show.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Come on. This is crazy. I mean, there's no way to break it down, right? This is horrific. It's, I mean, even on this podcast, the Trauma Therapist Podcast, this stuff is hard to talk about. But before we get going, and I know we're going to get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're calling from now.
Yeah, so originally I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, which is Western Canada, actually a little north of Oregon. So, okay. My family, I grew up in a large family. My grandmother had 11 children, Irish Canadian family. And my family, my mother and I moved from Alberta to Ontario and I think in the mid 80s in 1984, and to Hamilton, Ontario in Canada. And then we set up shop there, and that's where I kind of lived most of my life, and went through school and everything else that a young person goes through, and learning to thrive, and then I ended up getting into school with university and studying social work, and furthermore into clinical behavioral sciences, which led me into the field that I'm in now, which is doing mental health counseling. And I found my way up in northern Canada in a little First Nation community called Attawapiskat First Nation, working with the native population up here, very small community. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
All right. Walk us through how you got to this point where such that you've written this book.
So when I first started about 25 years ago, I started my recovery journey from alcoholism. And I was quite young when I found out that I had a problem with alcohol. So I sort of hit some bottoms, they say, with addictions. It led me into, getting some support with my addictions with alcohol. And then I just sort of started to unfold with my recovery. And then things started to surface that of things that I was not hiding, but difficult things, as you mentioned, about my early childhood experience with early childhood trauma. And I started to write a lot, like a journal. I did a lot of journaling and writing and different people that were my mentors and supports along the way, going through my own therapy, my own personal therapy and groups, men's groups, and just continuing to dig away at my healing journey.
Mhm.
And all of those diaries and journals, I've actually compiled it all together and started to write my own personal memoir, which is The Wounded Healer.
Okay, let me interject. Hang on one second here,
Yep.
Lee. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So you started to realize, or you started to drink a lot when you were how old? When did this start?
So I would say that my drinking started when I was probably 12 or 13 years old.
Okay. So super young, obviously. Okay.
Yes, super young.
Okay. And things just took off from there. You started drinking more and more. And at what point did you realize that you were an alcoholic? You were an addict in a sense, or did you say addicted to alcohol?
I think, when I drank from 12 to 13, and it sort of escalated over time, through high school. And I started to notice that I was just getting so sick physically sick from drinking alcohol. And it wasn't so much the amount that I drank, but what it did to me when I drank. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about addiction that, that people think if an alcoholic is somebody that just drinks a lot of alcohol, but that's not entirely the case. In my experience, I find that it's just what it does to you that has the impact. And so it progressed to a point where I became sick, and I became suicidal near the end of my drinking, and that was very frightening to go through that as well. So,
all right. Now, while you were going through this, while you had started out drinking at 12 or 13 and so forth, was there any sense of why you were drinking? In other words, why you were drinking? Yeah, period.
That's a good question. I think from the general response or thoughts that I have around that is that I sort of probably had a bit of awareness that I was trying to deal with something that I could not understand that was inside of me. And by this point, I actually had no recollection or really clear idea of any early childhood trauma stuff that happened for me. And so I just knew there was something wasn't right. And if you talk to a lot of addicts, they will always say that there's a feeling that something just doesn't feel right. And so because of that notification that we have inside of us, there's a sense of trying to run away from this very phenomena of something that's in there that, when I started to get a little more aware of my addictions, I realized, okay, well, maybe I'm trying to use this to not look at something that is deep inside of me that I don't want to look at. Yeah.
Well, if I may ask you, from what point to what point did the trauma abuse occur? How old were you?
I was sexually abused by a male babysitter when I was, I think, around probably 4 or 5.
Okay.
And so that was something that in some of my own research, like with my work and also my personal experience, I realized that as the common thing is that the earlier that a child has been traumatized, the more difficult it is, and a lot of things start to develop at that time. Interestingly enough, I'll just mention, as a matter of fact, when I looked at my addictions in my writing my memoir, things started to open up for me as well too. And I recall, and I write about this in my memoir, I recall a time where I had started sniffing model glue or a little bit of glue, probably when I was 7 or 8, and so there's something to get me and numb those feelings, right? So this is even before drinking alcohol. I noticed that some of the other behaviors of me trying to escape from those painful things that a child goes through was starting to like happen for me, right?
Wow. So you start drinking, things evolve. At what point do you start your healing journey? How does that unfold for you?
So I feel that I started my healing journey before I think I quit drinking alcohol. And the reason why I say that, because I really wanted to highlight in this, my memoir, The Wounded Healer, is that creativity and imagination in my writing and my interest in music earlier on in my life was something that was like a saving grace for me. So I feel that I started my healing journey a little bit before with my creative imagination and writing and drawing and painting. And even though I was still drinking along those days, I think that did something for me when I was younger, and I was a very creative person, right?
Right. Does there become a now excuse me if my questions seem really naive here,
That's
but
okay. That's
was there a point where you said to yourself, where you needed to kind of take another step in your healing journey and said, I need help. I need to see someone, whatever this thing going on inside me is that's, painful or I'm running from, I need to seek out some help here.
That's a great question. And what I found was that although I can do a lot of things in my healing journey in terms of my own trauma, I realized that I was having a lot of difficulty forming connections with people. So I was having a lot of intimacy issues, and that's not just in the sense of like, intimacy physically. It was more like, how can I connect with people intellectually, emotionally? Where's that emotional intelligence? All of these things that were very frightening for me, that I realized in order for me to survive living the trauma experience that I have, I need to connect with people in a healthy way. And what I found was, and it's very common with a lot of trauma, is what I started to see with my behaviors and my thinking and my emotions, was that I was getting so close to really making a really positive connection with somebody. And then I sabotaged it because I probably didn't feel like I had the skills to maintain a level of intimacy that I think is necessary for all of us humans, right? We all want to have a human connection. And that was the part that I found that I really needed to step up my healing journey and dig a little more deeper into why I wasn't forming connections with other people.
So how did you answer that question of why?
So therapy helped me to look at being vulnerable again. And we know that in a lot of our trauma work and a lot of like stuff that's coming on in the last few years, that the word vulnerability is like such a huge buzzword. And it just encompasses so many levels, and it's such a broad experience of this idea of vulnerability with our human emotions. So I think what I had to do was I had to sort of retrain my brain and retrain my emotions and sort of reparent myself through some therapy and through my own deeper contemplation and self-reflection, self-awareness, to allow myself to go to places where I had to risk getting hurt or risk being harmed. Because what I learned was, with childhood and going through that, I didn't have those skills to stay long enough in places where I can feel vulnerable, to have those raw emotions that maybe a normal person that hasn't gone through trauma can experience like regularly. So that's kind of what I found. I had to start really putting myself into uncomfortable situations in various scenarios with people, with things, with work and life situations, where I can build up that resilience, as they say, that's so important for trauma recovery.
At what point, or during what time, did it become conscious to you that you had been abused?
I think when I look back, that's a good question. I look back, I probably had some little fleeting conscious moments, what I call sort of moments of clarity, where I knew that there was something that had occurred that was wrong, that happened to me. And of course, I kind of like just know, that's, not real. And there's a period of trauma recovery that a lot of us, even if you're learning professionally, we go through memory. And, when I read The Body Keeps the Score, there's a lot of stuff there that's about memory. Is this real? Is this not real? So there was a period of really coming to terms consciously what had happened. And I think when it started to really occur for me that it was a real thing was then I felt things in my body. I felt tension and anxiety in my body that I could not make sense of where it was coming from. So with healing and my own therapy, I had to dig away at that as well, as to see like, where is this anxiety coming from? The very common thing that a lot of in my circles with professionally and personally, when we look at trauma, and understanding it more is like that confusion of confusion of like outside my external world is where I'm successful in my job and my career. I have reasonably good relationships with other people. Money's good, material things are good, but there's still an empty thing that's going on inside of me that I can't fill that void with all of these external things that are going on. So I had to do that work internally.
I just want to say that you are a pretty incredible person, Lee. I mean, sitting here, having gone through what you went through, the journey that you've been through, taking it on to write your story and come on this podcast and talk about what you went through. I just want to say, I admire your courage.
Thank you. Thank you. That does.
I really do. How did you get to a point where you're able to sit here and seriously and talk about this and keep it together?
Well, I often say to my friends, sometimes I'm like that duck that's on the water.
Yep.
On the top, it seems so calm and collective, but underneath the legs and the fins are going a mile a minute.
Right. And to a certain degree, we're all like that, right? I mean, if we break it down, but.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. And, sometimes I don't know myself, where that courage comes from. I think what I can say is that in the last couple of years or so, when I really started to, bring this memoir that I want to launch to the world, my main motivation is to reach out to men that are survivors of childhood trauma, and also anybody that's experiencing childhood trauma. That there is hope, I guess, and that helps me understanding that there's purpose in my life, because the more I kind of share my story now and get out and share about what happened personally, I feel that it always sort of just helps me realize that there is purpose in my life, because for a long time I did not see it, and I actually did not want to be here. So that's part of what keeps me going, I think. And these connections now, and having the courage to, is to basically an exercise for me to be vulnerable again, to talk about the man that's the man that's inside here that I'm trying to figure out as I walk this path.
As you progressed, as you moved along your healing journey, what helped you? What did you find? Who did you find that particularly was helpful to you?
Well, earlier on, I mean, I somehow was able to reach out in the phone book and look at, childhood, trauma therapy, back in Hamilton. And a wonderful organization, a Community Child Abuse Council, actually out of Hamilton, and I think they're still running. I ended up, just making an appointment, and I think I was probably just after I recovered from or started my healing journey with addictions. I realized I needed to get onto this. So I started to talk with a therapist and go through just kind of feeling safe, feeling safe with what was going on, and doing a little bit of homework kind of, and learning and really educating myself around what happened. And I think that gave me a lot of comfort. So I was really learning a lot by reading things about what a child goes through. And then it just seemed like doors opened up more and more for me to connect with other people that I trusted, because trust is such a huge, important thing for a person that, is wanting to heal in this way. And sometimes I learned it the hard way too. Sometimes you learn things the hard way, where you open up to people that may not, be totally trusting to what you're sharing. So we learn those things too. It's not always an easy path when you start to, to recover from trauma, but I found the way where I had mentors and really important people that simply just listened to me and encouraged me, just individuals like yourself, just telling me, it's a courageous thing you're doing, and keep doing it, that type of thing.
When you reached out to a therapist, did you do so knowing that you'd been traumatized, or did you reach out to someone just saying, I need to see a therapist, and through that process realize that trauma had occurred?
That's a really good question. I think for the most part, it's a process, because a lot of times in the beginning, when I reflect back now, I kind of didn't really know what was going on with me, but I just still knew that I needed to feel like I was supported, because I always look at it this way, and I talk about this in my book. There's almost a journey where there's little bits and pieces that are disclosed, and maybe that's the brain's natural way of unfolding and understanding and having awareness about what's going on with us. I think the brain is an amazing mechanism that way, and I think maybe it'll just hold stories or memories for you that will be prepared to disclose things for yourself as you journey and open up this door and that perspective that you can contain as a person, that I'm able to sort of feel like, okay, I can take this on and learn it. And the reason why I say that is because it's interesting in my research with trauma, professionally, I think that, there's only a certain amount of stuff that we can learn, that we can contain, I guess, if you want to say it that way, without overwhelming ourselves with so much information. And that's where the tricky balance is to try and find, okay, sometimes I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to learn more than what I want to learn more about everything and fix myself quickly. I wanted to find that solution so that I can heal and move on with my life. But the reality of trauma, what my experience is that it is a piecemeal thing. It's a process. And who knows, there might be still deeper and darker things about my trauma that I have to encounter as in my life that I don't know about yet. Yeah.
So the book, as you said, came about as a result of a compilation of writings. At what point did you say, I want to create this book, write this book, have it be a book, and get it out there?
Well, I've always loved writing, and I love poetry, and I love reading, and I kept my diaries. I had probably about 15 or 20, in the 24 years that I've been kind of keeping a journal. And so I thought, I'm going to go through, and initially I started to just want to go through and look at the poetry and some of the creative writing that I had, that I wanted to make compilations of. But then I started to within the process of writing about going back and reading some of my stuff, I started to realize, wait a minute, there's a healing component here with writing my personal story. And a lot of individuals we know that have written memoirs or anything about their own personal tragedies and stuff, like the writing itself is a healing tool to have therapy from. So I think I started to like just make a nice tea for myself. I went to a tea shop in Dundas, Ontario called Taylor's Tea House, and I used to sit there and I brought a little journal and I started like making things more formal, and that's how it started to get born out of that. And I love that. I love the experience of it. It was very whatchamacall, like not lethargic, but
Cathartic.
there's a word I'm trying to find. Yes, that's right. Cathartic. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And who's the book for? And what do you want them to get from the book? What's the message, in a sense?
Well, like I said, I think the book primarily is for male survivors of early childhood trauma or early childhood sexual trauma. And beyond that, it's also going to be for anybody that has experienced early childhood trauma or even trauma like, through adulthood. So I'm hoping to launch the book this year in the fall. And I'm hoping that the story and the message of my personal experiences can sort of show people and offer hope that what that person might be experiencing is very normal, of course. But there's also a creative element to how we survive in a lot of ways. And I want to sort of like research more about this, and I want to understand more about that. I want to like look at that resilient component that we talk about in trauma. I really want to break it down and look at other aspects of how people survive through trauma. Yeah. When
you sit up here, when I look at you, a part of me thinks of myself, I was bullied as a young kid, and it just jacked me up. It really impacted the trajectory of my life, like yourself, in terms of how I showed up in relationships and self-esteem. And it took me a while to not only talk about it, but talk about it in more detail and be more open, I guess, own the fact that this happened to me. As a guy, what's that been like for you? Has it been challenging for you to talk about the fact that you were abused?
Absolutely. I mean, it has been very challenging because, like part of the fear that I had about disclosing and talking about myself as a person and what I've gone through is that it's another lesson in exercise and vulnerability, because part of my fear initially was when I first wanted to write the book was that, well, if I do this now, then people won't want to be a part of me because they'll see how broken I am. Right. So that there's that imposter syndrome that comes up, or those old narrative things that come up about how I cope with living my life now. And so I had to overcome that. I had to overcome those old narratives and to say like, well, you know what helps me, guys, is that I just simply say like, we are all broken in some way. We are all broken in some way. And maybe my brokenness is more severe. And but that doesn't make it more less or more than the other people that experience trauma or brokenness in our life.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. So let me just reintroduce you here. I'm speaking with Lee Lyttle, mental health worker and author. The book is called Wounded Healer. Now, is this book out? Can people get it yet? Can they pre-order it? What's the story?
So I'm in the process now of just really working on some marketing stuff to set up the book launch, which I'm hoping will be released on Amazon in the fall of this year.
Okay.
And so I think that's where we're at with launching the memoir. So there's a last few little things that I'm going to be taking care of with that. But I am excited. I'm hoping that I'll have a pre-launch or even more information about the book. And people can always just follow me on my website as well, which I do have a blog, and that's leelyttle.com. And you can always reach me through contacting me through my website as well.
Okay. Now, when you get going, contact me because I'll do what I can to help you promote your book.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Lee, as we kind of wind down here, in addition to your own book, do you have any other go-to book recommendations, whether it's, trauma related or not? What would you say?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, The Body Keeps the Score is such an amazing, valuable resource for myself. And the other one is the Beast, the Beauty, or the Beast of the Beauty, I think, is the other one that deals with anxiety. Yeah. Or no, you have to make the beauty before the beast. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have to clarify that one.
That's okay. I'll look it up and I'll find it. I'll have it up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com.
Yeah.
All right, Lee, man, you, like I said, you are one definitely inspiring dude. And I really appreciate you coming on here. But just before we go quickly, so what are you currently doing professionally?
So right now, I'm very privileged and honored to work with a vulnerable population up here in Attawapiskat First Nation in Canada, and I work through the hospital setting. So I just do mental health counseling, and I do a lot of work with individuals and families around just education. And part of my practice is I do a little bit of CBT and maybe a little bit of trauma therapy. Here and there with individuals that suffer from mental illness and addictions. And so my professional life here is very spectacular, and what I've learned working with vulnerable populations. And my hope is to raise more awareness actually for some of the communities up here where there's a lot of lacking of resources for supports and for individuals that have gone through in Canada here with the First Nations has really been impacted by residential schools and intergenerational trauma that I think needs to be more awareness needs to be brought about it. So that's part of my goal professionally here is to be an advocate for a lot of the causes that I find here in the community, and hopefully that'll branch out into more other areas for me. So.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on here, man. And you're welcome back anytime, and we'll set that up soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, brother. Take care, man.
Okay.